is key to the Federal Reserve's design. Joining me now to discuss this and more, Charlotte Howard, U.S. editor for The Economist and host of the Checks and Balances podcast, and Barry Ritholtz is back, co-founder, chairman, and chief investment officer of Ritholtz Wealth Management. But you know him as host of the Masters in Business podcast on Bloomberg Radio. Let's start with you, Barry. What's your reaction to this ruling?
Well, it's a little perplexing because on the one hand, the president can fire any independent agency, but somehow drug safety or food safety is one thing, but financial and monetary planning is its own entity. Hold that aside. This is pretty good news for the Fed's independence and for them setting policy independent of whatever presidential wish happens to be emanating from the White House.
But is it perplexing? Because without trying to sound sassy, this is Taco Trump, right? The only time you actually find Trump to find some guardrails is when something is going to negatively impact the markets. And if the Fed was not independent or was not perceived as independent, it would negatively impact the market. So I'm not perplexed.
You could look at other things that undergird the market, like the rule of law, which the Supreme Court has been
Great point.
Damaging. A $90 trillion marketplace has grown to, nearly half of the world's market cap because of sanctity of property, contracts, and rule of law, and that's been undercut by SCOTUS. So it's hard to reconcile the philosophy of what they're doing other than random partisan spasms.
The Wall Street Journal says that Kevin Warsh is the biggest winner here, kind of touching on what Barry was saying, because now it gives him room to make decisions without feeling like Trump is going to wipe out the Fed or put his thumb on the scale in any way that he can.
Yeah, I think that he would certainly be feeling relieved to have this decision in hand. You've seen Kevin Warsh navigate this tension, I think, very deftly in the process of his confirmation hearing, where he wants to not undermine the president and yet assert his commitment to the Federal Reserve's independence. So now you have this kind of weird situation for the president where you have Warsh with this new level of insulation. You have Jerome Powell, the prior Fed chair, still serving on the Federal Reserve. And you have a president that's still really keen to cut interest rates, but a bank that's much less inclined to do so. So I think, yes, Warsh is relieved. It doesn't mean he's going to be entirely immune, I think, from the president's pressure.
And the president does still have the power to fire other agency heads, like the former FTC chair, Rebecca Slaughter. MS Now actually spoke to her yesterday, and I want to share a bit of what she said.
It is incredibly difficult to reconcile the two majority opinions in that case, of which only two justices, the Chief and Justice Kavanaugh, were in both decisions, which the best way you can understand them is to say, yes, we should not have removal protections, except at the Fed, because Wall Street is different. And I think that's part of the message that comes out of the court today that's really disturbing.
Do you agree? Because for those of us who are not in the finance or regulatory world, we're trying to understand what's the real impact of these decisions on us.
On the Federal Reserve, or in terms of being citizens of a country with a Supreme Court that's becoming increasingly hard to forecast? Like, what is the specific question you're asking me here? So
what Rebecca Slaughter is saying is this is bad for the American people. It's bad for the American people that the Supreme Court is making a decision like that. And the average person is saying, I don't know who she is. I don't pay attention to the Fed. How does this impact me? And I think you just answered it.
Well, let me put on my recovering lawyer hat and say we've had 90 years of precedent that says when Congress passes a law creating an independent agency and the president signs that law and Congress funds that agency, it's a process to keep them independent. The same process that is supposed to keep the Federal Reserve independent. Keep in mind, every president has jawboned and whined, begged, wheedled the Fed chief to lower rates or to be more accommodative. This president has just taken it to a whole different level, and the Supreme Court said you can fetch all you want, you just can't fire these FOMC members.
All right, on this show, we regularly ask the question, is this White House for sale? And there's a new story out there that I want to get your take on. The president invested in a taser manufacturer just weeks before ICE sought a $220 million contract that appears to be for that company's product. Of course, the White House says there's no conflict of interest and Trump's investments are managed by a third party. But yet this question comes up day after day after day. And the president claims the American people are okay with this.
Well, if you look at the polling on this, there's a big divergence, as there often is in Americans' perceptions of the president. So if you look at Democrats, 90% of them or so say that the president is corrupt. If you look at Republicans, it's down to 10%. And I think if Democrats take control of Congress, you're going to see a wave of investigations into this president come January. But the problem that you've seen in this particular instance, but in any number of instances, as you allude to, it's not like this is an isolated case, is that the president either has a conflict of interest, as his critics allege, or at least has an appearance of a conflict of interest, and the details may differ from one case to the next. But broadly, the effect is corrosive, that you have a norm of presidential behavior that is shifting, where it's unclear whether the president is acting in his own personal financial interest or the interest of the American people. And that, I think, regardless of party, over time, you'd view as a bad thing.
Last word to you.
We live in the golden age of insider trading. It's not just stocks or the market overall. It's prediction markets. It's anyone with inside knowledge of an imminent substantial policy change gets to pocket some cash from their knowledge. And corrosive is the right word. Very inappropriate. Again, anything that undermines a $100 trillion problematic.
On the eve of the 250th, Barry Ritholtz says we are in the golden age of insider trading. Thank you both so much. President Trump